There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Shawn Breathes Books. Welcome to my channel, and welcome to part 2 of an annual reading project. This is the second year that I have been reading novellas with the wonderful Calgary writer, Barb Howard, joining us from where else? Calgary. Hello again, Barb.
Hi, Shawn. Happy to be back.
Happy to be back with you. And this is part 2 of the novella project that we initiated last year, and we had so much fun doing it that we are doing it again for a second year, and I hope we're going to continue. In our first chat a few months back, I think it was at maybe the end of June, we assigned each other 3 novellas. When we did it in the first year, we were only supposed to choose one, and of the one that sounded the most interesting, but both of us being bookworms, we read I think all 3. So we've done away with this pretense that we're only going to read one, and I think we've each read the 3 that we were assigned. So this is part 2 where we report back. I think that's enough of a preamble, and I'm going to start just because that's the order that we did. And it was because I let Barb start last time that I'm starting this time, because on the list, it's the book she assigned to me. And that was the posthumous novella by Gabriel García Márquez, Until August. I have a library copy here. It's the lost novel, and it was translated from the Spanish by McLean. So I don't think this novella should have been published. I think that his sons should have respected his wishes, because I didn't think it was very good. There was a whiff of Marquezian genius, and some of the sentences were nice, and it reminded me of some of the themes that he loves to explore, but it just didn't hang together, and I didn't really end up caring about very much that was going on in it. I thought it was an inferior piece of work, and I guess the sons, the children, they not only published this against his wishes, but they also sold the film rights for one of his most famous books. I forget which one. And he didn't want that to happen either. So I think they are the villains in the piece. And those are my thoughts. I think you probably have loftier thoughts about, as a writer yourself, about this kind of posthumous disrespect.
Yeah, I do not have loftier thoughts on it. I agree with you. Even if it was good, I'm not sure they should have published it. Given that it's not good and not reflective of his work, can they forward, maybe somewhere in there it said that this was his fans deserved this, or the world needed to see this piece of work. And I would say the opposite. They show him editing it. That was sort of interesting. The stuff surrounding the story, they could have maybe written something about that, would have been interesting. But
yeah, or have it available to scholars or something. But
I just thought, yikes, doesn't work, and it's good it was short.
Yes, I'm glad it was short. And I can't help but think this was just a money grab by his heirs, because it probably sold a lot of copies because it was Marquez, but it was crap, I have to say. I can't think of anything about the story or the characterization that's worth commenting on or discussing. The premise was that it's a woman that goes back to lay flowers on her mother's grave every August, and she was buried for reasons that I don't remember now, but there's specific reasons why her elderly mother was buried on this island, and she goes back there. And after having gone back there for several years, she has, for the first time in her life, she has extramarital one night stand with a guy. And then that becomes an annual habit that she goes every year, and she has a hookup with a different man, and otherwise lives an abstemious, is that the right word? A very principled, moral, faithful, non-adulterous life with her husband. And yeah, it got old after about the 3rd year, I think, and I just didn't really care about it.
Yeah, I think, well, we have coming up, or in this set of 6 books that we'll be talking about, there are at least 2 others that talk, 3, I guess, women's sexuality and more modern visions of that, or unexpected visions, or whatever representations. And they are all better at doing that than this book, which just seems to be every year she goes and has sex with a stranger.
Yeah.
And some of it, which didn't seem so much one in particular adventurous as, criminal.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep. And it just got really samey. And I can't remember how many men, how many years it chronicled, but it was too much for this particular reader. So
When I was talking about it, I didn't want to sound like prudish, like, there's a way to have written this book or
oh
that
sure.
that would have
Oh,
been different.
absolutely.
Yeah, and I also had the problem with the lost novel, them packaging it, which is, I guess the packaging was part of my problem. So
It was never lost. I can't think of any other reason other than that they wanted some money. So that's, I think, all I have to say on that. Shall we move to your first book?
yes, which was one of the ones I'd never heard of. So I should say thank you for this opportunity to read all these novellas and especially introduce me to these new ones. So SS Proleterka.
There's my copy. Your copy has the SS in front. Some of the English translations have SS in front and some don't. Mine doesn't, but it's the same translator, the same text. I'll just say, so it's for the record, it's translated from, what language?
He's a Swiss writer, but writes in Italian.
Thank you. I have to look that up every freaking time. Translated from the Italian by Alastair McEwen. So I'm dying to hear your thoughts.
Well, of the three that you read, and then I read in response, this was my favorite.
Oh, good.
Good. By quite a bit. I read it on a plane going to Toronto, which is the perfect place to read a novella.
You should have read it on a ship going
I
across.
know. Well, we have a traveling theme of trains and ships and
absolutely.
But I also wondered if that biased it. I mean, I had this lovely uninterrupted full time to read it all. But I thought it was a terrific book. You had described it as it's like coldly written, and then I wasn't sure what that meant, but I get it. It is like that. It's quite an emotionally detached style of writing. Like on the back of my book, anyhow, someone described it as compressed, delicate, but brutally precise. And I thought, yes. And I love teenagers. I love this 15-year-old's point of view. You had wondered, what about these changing points of view? Because sometimes it's third person or more objective, and then it's first person. I thought that worked really well for topics that she was trying to be more detached in writing about. And I thought it worked for creating pictures. I just found her and her attitude believable, relatable. The whole thing worked for me. And I did look up a few things, like that the ship was real. And that this I hadn't thought of before, but these cruise, for those who haven't read it, it's a girl on a cruise with her dad, who she doesn't know really at all, from Venice to Greece. But that there's a whole genre of cruise stories. They're often romance, and that this would be the opposite of that. But somehow all ends up being sort of an emotional story.
Oh,
Yeah.
sure, because this one it's not romantic. I don't think well, I mean, that's debatable. And I wish I had made the time to reread it, because I do want to reread it and I just didn't get to it. But
Yeah, not romantic. It is
not romantic.
Not with the dad. Sure.
Yeah, she loses her virginity to one of the staff, and I don't think that's a spoiler. And that was really intense and fascinating to read about. And the remoteness between her and her father was fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Just like, again, I guiltily chose this metaphor, not metaphor, it's a really dead old idiom, like two ships passing in the night. Excuse the pun. Like did they share a room?
Yeah.
They did, yes, and they always ate at the same table, but it was like they were strangers. They just had so little to do with each other.
But still sort of, I don't know, two ships passing, but with the glance at the other one to see. Like I thought that she could be interested in him, but was protecting herself from being hurt yet again from another family situation.
Yes.
That she would treat him that bad, and that he would be okay with it. Somehow that worked for me.
That impassivity as a mask for what's really going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there was the scenes that I can't remember. You might be able to help me to refresh my memory, but scenes where there was so much emotion imbued into something inanimate. Now, there was something about a piano, and there was something
Absolutely.
about furniture in a room or something, and that was like just throbbing with emotion.
Yeah, yeah, because she's this teen. I guess it doesn't have to be a teen who just, has trained herself to not emote so much that, yeah, I wrote down piano, but I didn't write any notes beside it. But I thought, I mean, the piano in a way, I think is the mom, because the mom played the
Yes,
piano, was
right.
basically like a piece of furniture to her. Yeah, I like that quite a bit. There's like a little twist at the end, and I thought, didn't need that. Nothing turns on it.
Did the ending feel kind of tacked on?
No, no, and the very end I liked. It was just the one
Twist
twist
or
that was maybe meant to signal an end or like yet another thump on her life from her mother. One thump too many.
I have to admit that the first thing that I forget about a work of fiction is how it ends. I guess because what the end is at the end, and so I don't have much time sitting there with how it ends, that a week later I might not remember exactly how it ends, but have a full sense of it as a work of fiction. But unless the end is really, somehow important to the whole book, it usually just goes. Is there something wrong with me, Barb? What should I do?
No, no, absolutely. No, sometimes I forget, it's a kind of book that I forget much about the main character. So if it's a strong setting book, so that's
I, gue-
even worse.
I guess because I read for character more than plot, and especially in a character-driven novel where there isn't a lot of plot. Yeah, I don't remember how things particularly end up. So interesting.
And for
Well,
this
you make
book, the fact that you didn't remember the twist, I think, emphasizes its lack of importance.
well. Let's go with that because it takes the emphasis off my cognitive issues. I really want to read more Fleur Jaeggy because this was fascinating.
Yeah, same. Although I did see a number of things that said this was her best, so I don't
I
know.
saw that too. Yes. So the next one that I was assigned, I had already read twice before, so I didn't reread it a third time. But it is one of my favorite novellas, favorite works of fiction that I've read in the last few years, and that's Claire Keegan's Small Things Like These. I think we're probably not going to talk about it too much because it has been talked about by me and several guests on my channel a lot recently. But it is a wonderful work of fiction. Claire Keegan is an Irish writer set in 1985 in an Irish town just before Christmas, and the father is a working class dad with three daughters, or maybe four, a whole bunch of daughters, and a really stern wife. And he becomes he's is he a delivery man? He seems to be delivering stuff, but I can't remember if that's his job. Delivery man?
Yeah, fuel, different kinds of fuel.
He's a fuel
Oh,
guy, and he's making fuel deliveries all over the town and environs. And one of the places that he regularly delivers fuel to is the convent up on the hill. So this story is very much about the what are they called? The Magdalena laundries. It's a huge scandal that's still reverberating through Irish culture, and it's akin to lots of other abuse scandals with the Catholic Church in particular, but they don't have exclusive rights to this, but they seem to have been the worst at it, where pregnant teenage women were shoved into these laundries run by the convents, and then they were horribly abused and really kept almost as inmates with no freedom and so on. And so this story is about that father encountering one of those poor girls when he was making a delivery, and then plot ensues. I won't say any more about the plot, but it's such a social politically charged story that's set at Christmas and anti-sentimental, heroic, with all kinds of drama, and makes you think about all the ways in which misogyny has warped modern society. And it's just an incredible piece of writing. I loved it.
yeah, I love it too. It's moral courage or somebody trying to
All
do
for
the right thing against all odds. Like
yeah.
the story itself is beautiful, but the writing, like I don't teach writing anymore, but if I did, I would use the last paragraph in this book as, you know, here's some perfection, because if you took, there was one word, if you take it out, it means something different. For the ending, it leaves a completely different
Oh, see,
vibe.
do I remember that? I don't remember it. Let's see. Yeah, I can't read the last sentence. It is a incredibly powerful sentence, and it would be a spoiler to
Yeah.
read it in its entirety, but it is that last, I'll give you the last phrase. We need a he here, which I'll supply. He legitimately believed that they would manage, and that's how the story ends. And it's kind of hopeful. Now, I've heard an interview with Claire Keegan. It was with Eleanor Wachtel. I'll put a link in the show notes, where Claire Keegan said she kind of de-emphasized the moral heroism of the tale and felt like she wouldn't fault anybody in the position of the dad who made another choice. So she
Yes.
didn't kind of valorize him, and that was a really interesting, kind of unsettling spin from the author on it. I'll have to go back and listen to that. I may not be remembering it correctly, but it was something along those lines where she kind of upended the kind of standard reading of the story. But
I think that makes kind of a little bit more heroic, doesn't it? If to take the other course, most would
you're
not,
right.
most were encouraging to to take the easier road,
Yes,
more common. That's
absolutely.
interesting. Now I have to go look up Eleanor Wachtel's
Yeah,
interview.
and it'll be in the show notes for people watching, because I know I've referred to it in past discussions. But anyway, yeah, it's a wonderful work of fiction. I also read, I think it was the one just before this, Foster, which I loved maybe even a little bit more. As much as I loved this, I thought Foster was just another work of perfection, and those are the only two I've read so far, but looking forward to getting to all her stuff. She puts out a book about every 7 years or something, so there's long waits in between, but there's quite a bit of backlist there to
And always novellas.
novellas or short stories. And she just had 2 short story collections.
Yeah. Hmm.
Fascinating. So I'm glad for a chance to talk about it, however briefly again, because it is one of the most incredible works of literary fiction put out in the last several years. And what's next for you?
Child of
Child of
Fortune.
Fortune. All right.
Well, we've been doing so much agreeing. I'm kind of concerned that we won't agree on this one.
Well, that's okay. No, don't
So,
be concerned. No, 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 no.
yeah, so thank you for introducing me to this. I haven't read translation from Japanese before, I don't think. So I've read Japanese writers who are writing in English. The background, I guess, is that it was quite a groundbreaking book when it came out. And I can see why, given it's a single mother in Japan, thinking of having another baby or possibly having another baby, and then just how culturally and in her family and community, how that's gonna roll and the issues with that. I love that. It felt a little dated to me in some ways, which is, you know, even though those are all still issues, there was something about the writing, maybe it's in the 70s or something, that kept stopping me. One of the things was, like, she was always, say, drinking, and and those were like, you know, I was saying, like I don't care, do what you want, but it did seem like it just stopped me. You know, she had a hangover, and that I felt like that was guiding me towards some issue at the end of the book. Like, you know, just drinking during pregnancy. I wouldn't judge someone for having a glass of wine or anything, but there's a lot of drinking, like, which was sort of fascinating. I think you described her as a hot mess, and now we know that this person, just, I think, in a written today, somebody else in the scene in the novel would comment or something like that. And then the same goes with, maybe I've been watching too much American debates and politics, but with abortion, I was keeping track of the baby that we as readers believe she's going to be having, and she's 5 months in, saying, well, you know, maybe I should you know, go see a doctor and abort this baby. Like, and I'm calculating the time and thinking, well, okay, you know, maybe that has to happen. But yeah, it just, you know, there I was figuring out what month she was because I was like, really, this has been a while. So another case of being a hot mess, I guess. But so I didn't want to judge the character, but something about it just seemed like others would be responding in some way.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I didn't remember the 5 month that she was considering abortion at the 5 month.
Maybe it's her sister comes in and says that, and nobody says, yeah. Well, then you might have to go someplace to this place instead, or whatever. But also, I found that sort of talk interesting in that nobody was judging it. It was very much, people suggesting have an abortion or and her talking about she had one. So in that, it was refreshing, and I am sure groundbreaking for when it was written. It seemed like there was no rush, no,
for a thing that has a definite
timeline. It seemed like, maybe, she's still thinking, maybe that's the idea. Or
the mores and social conventions around women in the workplace and anything to do with the status of women, it's at least 20, if not 30 years behind the West. At a job interview, a young woman, the boss would just say, I'm not going to hire you. You're going to get pregnant. Why would I hire you? Like, they don't have a sense of human rights about it, or it's pretty backwards when it comes to the status of women. So, and it would have been worse in the 70s or whenever this novel was set.
Definitely felt there was something quite different going on there than would have even been going on in Canada in the 70s. So so this character is super interesting in all the things that she's going ahead and just doing, and the family's frustrations and things are believably presented.
Yeah, and I have a strong memory. I mean, I saw it dozens and dozens of times over 13 years, but I remember the first time I was in an izakaya, which is like a Japanese pub, and there was a young family with at least one toddler and a baby, and they were sitting, and the room was so smoky, and they were just there drinking and having a good time, and the mom was holding the baby, and the toddler's running around, and the place is just blue with smoke. So, couldn't see that in Canada. The smoking rules have gotten a lot stricter since then, but yeah.
So yes, that sense you would have had was the sense that I was having reading the book, which is good.
Yeah.
Which is good. But it did take me out of the story.
Interesting. The part of the ending that I do remember was that it ends with like the last pages or something. There's a shift. He's seeing somebody at a bar and they have a bit of an argument, some man, and then he leaves and she goes outside and she has a brief and I think positive interaction with strangers, and that's the last scene in the novel. And I don't remember exactly what transpired, but I just remember that it captured my imagination as a really indescribably perfect and really unique ending to that novel. I loved it.
Yeah, I read on Goodreads somewhere something like "woman escapes mansplaining." I think for that scene.
Right.
Made me laugh. Yeah, so because when I was reading it, I wasn't thinking this isn't working. I was thinking more it was not engaging like I would with another novel, and not questioning things. But then I'm not really in a position to question because I wasn't in Japan in the 70s. Yeah.
Well, I mean, and we all have our things like that. Like I remember, I will not read a book about Christian missionaries. And I read one. It was actually a Japanese novel about Christian missionaries in Japan and how they were persecuted in the 15th century or 16th century. And it made me so mad. It's like, I wanted to torture them too. Like, what the hell were they doing there? Missionaries just makes me crazy. So, I mean, we all have our own thing about what will pull us out of the story, right?
Yeah, there was another thing too. A personal thing of mine is when I see a dream in a story, when it comes up, I just think, oh no, please not a dream, because usually it's a simplistic way of showing like what the story's really about, but with some symbols or something like that. And I discourage students from using them, and I just try never to use them myself. I have for sure used them though. So this Child of Fortune opens with a dream. And I thought, oh, we're going to be, doing some dreaming that's going to tell me about the importance of or make it seem more important or something like that. It turns out the dreams are important, and I would say they tie into the ending, and they are throughout the story, I still don't really know necessarily what they're about. There seems to be a lot of white light in them, and the white light's
There's
on
a
the
lot of
cover.
white light in all of her fiction and on the covers and everything.
I don't know what that means, but
Yeah.
it was kind of working for me anyhow by the end, that part, once I got over the, would it make a difference if I don't read the dream? Sometimes I think that when I see a dream coming up.
And I had the same allergy as you, and I got over it to the degree that I can now, when it works, it works.
Yes.
But I think often it still is, like you said, it's exactly what you said. It's just kind of a lazy way to insert some symbols. And don't get me started on symbols. There's no such thing. There are images, but symbols, don't anybody mention symbols in their review of a book, I start to froth at the mouth in indignation. There's no such thing as a symbol. I will interpret what the image means. God damn it! Don't tell me what it means. But anyway,
we do have piano again in this one.
okay. And see, I didn't remember the dream at the beginning, but I don't have the allergy to dreams that I did for many, many years, which may mean that I devolved rather than evolved. So
Oh no, I need to get by it because this book was better. She was clearly working throughout on a more than just saying, here's the subconscious. Yeah, and especially since it's throughout, as you say, so many concepts in all her books.
yes.
They take
And
more
dreams
than-
are actually interesting in Japanese culture. The first dream of the new year is very important.
Oh,
Hatsuyume, first dream of one has in the new year, and it has some fortune telling, foretells whether the year's going to be lucky or not.
I would say, in contrast to the dreams, some of the concrete things, like the piano, I feel like I was caught up in the piano at what was the one we did in our last round? Country dance?
Did you dance?
Yes.
The
They bought a piano and that. Anyhow, the piano teaching in this was quite interesting, and the way she thinks about her students was interesting too. I like that quite a bit. Seems super realistic.
Yes.
And kind of fresh and unexpected.
I find your thoughts very interesting and provocative, and we can still be friends if you didn't like it as much as me. But I'm glad that you gave it a shot. Great. Okay, and what's the next one for me? Yeah. Oh, Animal Farm, I think. Let's see. Yeah, this one, I thought Animal Farm was really well written, and I don't think I actually ever read it. It was one of those books that it just didn't ever happen to be on one of my English syllabi. So I never read it, but it kept being referred to in lectures and literary, articles that I was reading, and so I couldn't remember if I ever read it. So I read it. It's really well written, and I never got past my hang up, which is I can't stand it when animals are anthropomorphized. I just can't stand it. So I didn't enjoy it at all. I can see how it would have spoken to many a person, and probably still does, about dictatorship, communism, and all that stuff, but I didn't like it.
You mentioned you were probably gonna be going there with this.
Yeah. And I wish I could have, but I wish I wouldn't have. I did it on audio, occasionally dipping into the text, but just to keep myself, if I was getting confused about anything, I would look it up on the ebook. But I just don't do well with animals that talk and have human characteristics. I just can't stick with it.
And it doesn't stand up to the other ones we looked at in terms of just depth. I'm sure I said in the last one, I wanted to read it because it seems to keep coming up in conversations. Not that I go to cocktail parties, but if I did and people were mentioning it, yes, I felt like I needed to know, how can that book be brought up by so many different political entities, which seem to stand for the opposite things from each other. So I'm glad I read it. I have a sense, but I did kind of immediately forget who's who in it and thought it was well done, and then thought power corrupts and proceeded to forget a lot of it. Yeah.
I guess one of the many reasons I don't get invited to dinner parties is with my controversial opinions, because if anybody brought up Animal Farm with me now, I would feel much more entitled to rant about why I didn't like it.
It is feeding a rant. That's why I read it. And what I did, probably the best thing is I looked up George Orwell and saw that he would call himself a democratic socialist. So maybe that's all I needed to know.
And so I would agree with him there. I read 1984 twice in my 20s for two different classes or something, and I enjoyed it, if that's the right word. And the movie that came out in the 80s was really good. And I have no desire to read it a third time, but especially the rat cage. It's just fills me with terror just to think of it. But it was a good novel. I probably wouldn't enjoy it very much now, but it made quite an impression on me, and it had very similar themes, of course. More recently, I have read Down and Out in Paris and London, which was about kind of a memoir or autofiction of him when he was dirt poor and working in hotels and restaurants, and just how unsanitary, and how it was many months before I could go back to a restaurant. Talked about how gross the working conditions were, and you wouldn't ever want to eat anything they brought out to your table, and oh my God. But other than that, I wasn't overly impressed with it as a piece of writing. But
Yeah, I think anything with too big a message
yeah, that's the thing.
is who's good at taking messages, not me.
Well, that's I like that line. I'm gonna steal that one from you.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he's kind of dated. He feels dated to me. I read a lot of people who were writing in his era that I like much better, and they tend to be, spinsters, Barbara Pym or whatever. But yeah, he's doesn't have much to say to me in this stage of my life.
And in terms of politics or classism, or somebody say that I, are definitely animal farmers about too. I think the other books that we're talking about, almost all of them do a better job.
Nuance and
Yeah.
attached to human characters and characters who are layered and so on. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, those are my thoughts on Animal Farm, and I am dying to hear your thoughts. In fact, not only am I dying to hear your thoughts on the Pegnitz Junction, the one novella that Mavis Gallant wrote in her storied career, but to tell me what it's all about.
Yeah, well, I left this one to read last because I thought I'm going to love that so much. And so I guess to bookend it, I read SS Proleterka on a plane, and it was the perfect setting. And then I read Pegnitz Junction like 2 days after foot surgery, laying in a bed. So maybe that colored my reading, but I was confused. I would say, for as far as how she writes, I found a lot of it really funny. I found her descriptions at the sentence level, at the paragraph level. Well, I love them. And as a whole, the character Christine talks about interference. They're on a train trip. She's with her lover and his son, and she's hearing other people what they're thinking. And it's basically all has lots to do with how crappy everything is, and currently, and the fallout from World War II. They're speaking French, so people, I don't know, they're German, and that plays into it. So all of that was so wonderful, but it was just a lot. And while I found the switches in point of view and Proleterka effective, adding to the story, here I was like confused when, for not always, but sometimes. Now we're in the castle at the side of the train tracks with the people there, and but in their minds, but Christine's not there. But how is she? Yeah, like I was as a whole, didn't stick together for me.
I would tend to agree, and maybe I feel more comfortable saying that because you had a similar experience. I think it did come together, like that whole thing about interference. Well, I finally got what she was talking about and realized that she was just kind of tuning into the consciousness or the narratives of the people that she was sitting with on the train or walking by or walking along the path with. I didn't get that until the end. Some of the stories of the characters that were in her midst are italicized, but some of them aren't. And I wondered if the ones that weren't were her making up the stories compared to tuning into the real story. I didn't know, because the one that you were talking about the castle, I think that's when she goes to the window and looks out the window. And I think that's her making that story up, but I don't know. It's certainly confusing and certainly very ambiguous.
Yeah. And yet I love her descriptions of little Bert, the kid she's traveling with, and they are
Oh, yeah.
exhausted and funny, and the other people, and the woman Like the one interesting interference, or most interesting for me, was the woman in the same seating area on the train as them. And
Certainly by the end, she got so much more interesting for me by the end when we got to the end of her story. And
yeah, she ended up being really the only one I was caring about other than the main character. I read, oh, I did, maybe I got it from the collection. I don't know if that's what you did. And I read couple of short stories that were in the collection with the novella. They're like, wow. I think the last one was an alien flower or something. That was like, well, 5-star there, that right there, that you can see why the New Yorker took that one. It was really good. So the novella in a way felt more experimental. Postmodern.
I think that I agree with that. So it opens with this younger woman. How old is she? 20, 30, 27, something like that. He's got a fiance, but she's having an affair on her fiance with his older married man whose wife has deserted him, and he's raising this 6-year-old kid boy. And they go to Paris for a week. We meet them in Paris, and they got a really strange. We won't go into detail, although it was fascinating detail about their room and the connecting room, and they get kicked out many hours earlier than they were needed to check out because of a racist porter, and all that was bizarre and fascinatingly described and all that stuff. Loved it. And then they get on the train to go home because there's an airplane strike. And then the rest of the story is either on the train or trains, because they have to change trains. Their routes get diverted and one route gets canceled. And so they end up in Pegnitz Junction, which is a real place. And it is in what is now and would have been then, in this early post-war period, West Germany. And they can see the wire fences that are separating the American occupied territory from maybe the Russian, and there was threats of being shot if you got too close to the fence and all this stuff. Christine, our protagonist, by the end, you kind of understand that she's, like I say, tuning into all these other characters' stories. It's not just Mavis, Gallant inserting their stories, but that they're coming filtered through the interference that these stories are causing in Christine's mind. And the little boy is a bit annoying. He's cute and a bit annoying, and he keeps saying to her and to his dad, read to me, read to me. And so they're making up stories to him. And sometimes Christine says, no, there's too much interference. And that line makes sense by the end.
I love the line, you could, it's kind of like there's too much life going on. There's too much, I see a purpose for it and as a comment in my life or something like that, which
Absolutely.
is.
I can't even think straight. Like I got too much on my mind, basically.
Yeah, too much or worrying about other people or thinking I know what they're thinking. I love that. I love this like overall toll of the war on everybody feeling. I thought that was effective. And then I love that they're eating. Issues are where are they going to eat, how are they going to pee, like where are they going to go to the washroom and getting a little burnt there. Food, then there's no food there. It's this odd sort of layer of survival. They're not starving or anything, but just these day to day, how to get through the basic things you got to do in a 24-hour period. I love that too.
And against the backdrop of kind of an impoverished post-war Germany, things where supplies were running out. I looked up, I didn't find many reviews or whatever of this, but the New York Times review from way back in 1973, this line stuck out at the end. The earlier part of this is talking about the lack of connection between the stories and that confusion about that. And then this, it's a full paragraph, but I think it's something for you and I to hear and chew on. That Mavis Gallant refuses to make such connections for us, refuses to speak as a thoughtful omniscience behind her characters, might be admired as indicative of her belief that life's oddities mustn't be ironed out into the orderly understandings of fiction. Yet by cultivating incongruities, juxtaposing voices and memories that fit together in only the craziest way, the author might seem to evade responsibility for saying or caring very much about her characters and their situation. This is the palace of art, capital P, capital A, and Mavis Gallant is perilously close to residing there in a novella which in the long run feels too clever, too oblique, too arty for its own moral and human good. That's quite well written. I don't
Yes,
know
I
if I
wish I
completely
said
agree
that.
with it, but it gives voice to some of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I mean, I admire the effort to try what she's trying in the story. I do admire that, but yeah, it comes out. If it was too arty but kind of worked better, I'd be. I'm glad that reviewer said that. I did wonder if I was missing a lot more than a reader at the time the story would have.
Well, 1973, you've been closer to that post-war period, but yeah, it's interesting. Think about Mavis Gallant moved from Montreal to Paris in 1950, I believe. Yeah, she would have been kind of nearby.
Oddly, for this character, Christine, who's engaged to a guy who's gone to France with her lover and his son, and the son's and comes and is with them and is with them in bed. Somehow all of that seemed totally working for me and that character. So much better than Coco in Child of Fortune than the things that she's doing. I mean, they're a little more freewheeling than society would have you think's going on, I guess, is a similarity in the characters, but somehow this Christine wore it more believably for me.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And so now I want to ask you and ask myself, would this have been better as a short story with the experimental stuff stripped out? Like all those stories that we couldn't follow or didn't really know for several pages who was speaking or whose story it was. If that was all stripped out and it was just this enigmatic story about Christine, her married or divorced or whatever separated boyfriend, and Herbert and little Bert, the toddler, and a more straightforward way of refracting a few of the people they were on the train with, or that they were telling stories or sharing these stories more directly, would that have been a better, would we have enjoyed or been engaged more deeply with that?
I think I would have, but I'm kind of embarrassed to say that because I wish I was more for the experimental version, but
I mean, there's just so much rich detail. I read the first 2 pages of this story on my Friday Reads video a few weeks ago because it's just entrancing. I mean, the detail about like I've already kind of alluded to the detail of their room, but the view out the window and this church that's being constructed or scaffolding or whatever, and it's all just incredible. And I don't want any of that stripped out. It was just, and I don't really know how strongly I'm arguing that it should be changed into a different kind of story by removing a bunch of stuff, but really it was that character work of those 3 main characters that was the gold for me.
yes, like it ties into what I was saying too, but that like this constant kind of cleaning or thinking about cleaning or we're gonna get shower. I mean, because they're traveling and because they got kicked out of their place and couldn't. I love that whole I don't know, impression or motif or something for that post-war period.
And the
People,
sense of, yeah, there's a sense almost too of alongside that of almost like a hangover of fear of violence with the barbed wire and the fact that somebody had been shot at that Pegnitz Junction, or maybe it was the stop before then. And there was a bunch of little old ladies, and then when conductor came over, they were scared. And I mean, all of that I think was left over from the war. Yeah, so there was a lot of kind of social stuff that was fascinating to tease out, and some direct discussions about reparations. And there was a guy from Holland there was, and there was some sexuality about whether Herbert was actually gay. I don't know. That kind of threw me for a loop, but there was just so many things going on that all these ambiguously voiced narratives kind of maybe interfered with or made more difficult to follow. But I'm really glad I read it for a second time. I remembered nothing about it from when I read it about 7 years ago. It might be a novella that I might pick up in another 10 years and see if I get more out of it.
yeah, for the 3 books that you suggested reading that I read out for all 3, I thought is my lack of the historical knowledge of those times affecting how I'm reading this in a bad way.
And I would echo your comment about you sampled one of the other stories in the Pegnitz Junction, the story collection. And
Mhm.
yeah, her stories are great. And there is an obliqueness to all of them, but it's not to this level where it's off-putting or potentially off-putting. Well, thanks for indulging me with that one.
No, I was super happy to read it, and gosh, we're in quite a lot of agreement today.
We are. But you still have much nicer hair. So, Barb, I would love to do this another year. Are you up for it?
I am up for it.
I don't need you to sign a contract or anything. Life
No, I
happens.
love this.
And I think we discussed, I can't remember if it was online or offline, discussed mixing it up a bit and putting forward novellas that we haven't ourselves yet read.
Mhm.
And so I might, up one or two of my selections for next year might be books that I myself am just curious about and haven't read, and I'd like to read with you. So feel free to do the same or not.
No, I'd love that.
And we got a late start on this year compared to year one, just because of stuff going on in my life, but we may get it started in the spring or something. Who knows? The timing will sort itself out. But in the meantime, Barb, thanks for another invigorating edition of our novella reading project.
Thanks so much for giving me stuff to read and let me talk about it.